Hello everyone and welcome back to Serious Sunday. My name is Luke, I'm your host, and this is the show where I talk about video games and things. And usually when I talk about video game development as a career, I usually hold it off for some Thursdevs, but I got a recent number of requests for interviews from a couple of students to ask about working in video game design, so I thought I'd just jump in here and throw out a couple of minor examples of things that might be handy for people that are interested in the field in general. A lot of people have asked me how one gets into video game design, especially since I got into the games industry before there were really video games diplomas to be had out in the wild. In my particular case, I was just kind of in the right place at the right time, having a friend that already worked in Konami that was able to get me a job in QA. But that said, more than anything else, that was just a way for me to get my foot in the door. I personally, however, have been on the interviewer's couch when interviewing potential new candidates for a design position in studios that I've worked for. So I can say that there are a few things at least that we look at that we sort of prioritize as things that we'd like for a designer to know how to do. First and foremost, and this is something that I said in the Thursdev video that I created way back in the day about becoming a designer, more than anything else, having shipped something or having something that you designed yourself that you can point to and say, this is my work, is absolutely something that will give you a lot of points when applying for a design job. As the designer kind of needs to be able to work in tandem with all of the other members of the game development team, programmers and artists, and also the production and sales team, that requires us to be at least moderately decent at performing the duties that each of these people can do. Not to say that we have to be able to do them specifically, that's what their jobs are, but we need to at least know how they're done. And having done a one-man indie project, for example, will be a great boon in this sort of an area. So it's a weird way to answer a question about how do I start working in games is to make a game, but I think you'll hear that one echoed quite a bit, sort of around the space of people who make games. We don't really specifically care about what engine you created, whatever it is that you worked on in. I personally use my portfolio projects as things that I created in the Adventure Game Studio, which is not a mainstream engine at all. But that said, engines like Unity and Unreal 4 are becoming a lot more user-friendly and therefore give you an opportunity to do a whole lot more in a much shorter span of time than they once did at the very least. So starting on a project in that kind of an area is a great place to get started. Otherwise, just sort of consuming as much knowledge about game design and game development that you can get is, of course, worth every single moment that you're doing it. If you're interested in educating yourself a little bit on game design, there's at least one book that I might recommend. Tynan Sylvester, whose name I'm not entirely sure that I'm pronouncing correctly, was a developer that worked at Irrational Games, if I'm not mistaken, who was also the developer of the game that I named Game of the Year 2016, RimWorld. He wrote a book that was called Designing Games, A Guide to Engineering Experiences, which talks a lot about the game design process, iterative game design, and so on, that may very well be worth checking out. Otherwise, there's plenty of resources on game design out on the internet, and if I might continue to plug this individual channel, the Thursdev videos do a pretty good job of that as well. Even things by non-designers like Extra Credits, another YouTube channel that if you know of this one, you almost definitely also know of. And things like Game Theory, although they're not necessarily design specific, and are sort of a more lighthearted jaunt into video games in general, get you thinking about video games in a more sort of analytical way, which is something that you absolutely need to be able to do if you're interested in game design. People have also asked me about the game design process or how it works from conception to release, so I'll just kind of give you the basic thought there, but I mostly worked only on games that are in commercial development studios, so the process of starting a project has always come mostly from an RFP process or was sort of conceived by a studio's creative director. The RFP, in case you're not familiar with that particular term, means a request for pitch, which means that a potential publishing partner will contact a development studio with an existing high-level requirement and ask the studio to create a pitch document and a budget plan. Since I worked in production, I also have some experience working with these pitch documents, but a lot of the time those are also given to the design team, since the design team are ultimately the people who are going to be working on the game anyway. If a pitch ends up being successful, the pre-production process in the studios I've worked at have usually a lead designer creating a game design document that deals with the mechanics of the game in detail on paper, as well as a plan for implementing them in a game, rough stats, figures, general plan for the game that can then be revised and implemented over the course of development. Game designs, of course, see a lot of revision over the lifetime of a project. Usually things change an awful lot from the beginning to the end, but the designer is responsible for making sure that those changes are documented and the GDD is up to date. And they're also responsible for conceiving of algorithms, equations, general program concepts, and so on that'll be used in the implementation of the game mechanics. Now, the design process is different in every studio, so it's difficult to really pinpoint one specific technique that'll be transferable to every possible development environment. But if, like I said before, you're ravenous and you learn as much as you possibly can, at least the knowledge will be transferable into any studio environment. Now, of course, if you want to make your own game, which is to say a game that you came up with from the very beginning, then you really kind of want to work as a one-man studio or in a very small studio where you have a lot of push. Even in the 17-man studio of Monstrosity, I don't really have the decision-making power to decide what games we're going to be working on next. That's more of a committee group think type thing, but there are benefits and drawbacks to both. Like many things, game design is usually a very collaborative process, so you just kind of have to learn to work together with other people, and honestly, working in a studio environment is very rewarding. You may not have absolute control over the project, but everybody can give you something that's really valuable to work with. Now, this isn't exactly a new topic. As I said, I've done a video about this before on ThursDev, but since I've gotten a few requests for more information about how to get into game design, I thought I would just jump in on this particular weekend and talk a little bit about it today as well. Anyway, that's about it for me for tonight. Thank you for tuning in as usual, and I do hope that you enjoyed this video. If you feel so inclined, I'll be linking the video that I created before talking about game design and getting into a little bit more of the actual specifics of the design job, but you can consider this sort of a supplemental video to that. Thanks for watching, as always, and take care.